Hi, my name is James and I paint miniatures.
This is Spoon 37 Minis. Okay, so welcome to What's on the Bench, episode 8. Here I'm going to be doing layer highlights on the Goliaths with the Army Painter Tanned Flesh and a small layer brush from the Games Workshop. This is one of my favourite brushes. It gets an awful lot of use in everything I'm painting, but it's particularly good for layering like this. Now, if any of you have watched the official Warhammer TV on how to paint Goliaths, Duncan shows you to base coat the skin as I've done with Bugman's Glow. Use a wash over it, Agrax Earthshade. I've used Flesh Wash from the Army Painter. But then they want you to layer one layer of, I think it's called Kislev Flesh. And that's very, very bright. It's 3 or 4 shades brighter than the base colour, whereas what I'm trying to use is Tanned Flesh from the Army Painter, which is roughly 1 shade up, if you like. So this is a much more subtle layering effect, but it will be a very noticeable highlight. I'll try and show before and after pictures when I'm done, but you should be able to see as the video progresses, the raised areas will get a little lighter as I go along. But it gives a lot of scope for doing a second coat in the same colour, because of course the paint is transparent, and then also an additional coat in the next shade up, which I believe is Barbarian Flesh, also from the Army Painter. Now, as you can hopefully see, the idea here is to paint on the raised surfaces, leaving enough of the base colour and the recessed wash showing in all of the sort of lower surfaces, all of the recesses, so that you get this nice graduation from dark to light. Now, as this is the very first layer, you can actually be quite generous. You can paint quite a lot of the raised areas. You can paint, you know, something like 75% of the surfaces, as long as you leave those recesses. So it's a fairly simple process, and it's not particularly difficult, provided the brush is small enough to tackle these small details like around the nose and the cheeks and so on. These lines are very thin in some areas. I'm also going over the rims of the ears and the sort of raised bits in the neck and so on as carefully as I can, trying to catch the wrinkles on the back of the neck as well. But you can be fairly generous at this stage. It's just after this you do a smaller layer highlight in the same colour, and then after that you take a slightly lighter colour and you do a smaller highlight still, and that's how layering is supposed to work. Now, I'm doing this in the same kind of order as I've done with things like the base coating, where I'll do the, you know, the head and then the neck and then the sort of traps and the pecs and so on, and just keep going around in roughly the same order to make sure I don't forget anything. But obviously here I'm being much more selective than I was with the base coat, so I spend a lot less time, particularly on areas like the chest, the traps, and so on. But then conversely, I'll spend quite a lot of time on the muscular arms, because there's a lot of raised areas there that need going over. Speaking of the arms, I'm going to start with this ridiculously oversized shoulder, because these Goliaths are incredibly jacked. And if you've ever seen a picture or video of a bodybuilder, that's kind of the look I'm going for. So I'm trying to paint this in parallel lines, because if you've ever seen a bodybuilder, you'll see that they actually have striations showing in the muscles. And I want that same kind of look, so I'm trying to move the brush in those kind of directions. I know it's probably not high quality enough to actually see thin lines or anything, because obviously this is still quite a small model, you can see relative to the size of my fingers. but I'm just trying to make sure that the brush moves in the same kind of direction as the muscle fibres naturally would. I've got this idea that that might make it look a tiny bit more realistic, even though there's nothing really that realistic about these muscles on these guys, which are very exaggerated for story reasons. I mean, these guys are supposed to be industrial workers that are kind of boosted up on not only stimulants, but also they've got all kinds of mechanical apparatus to allow them to do heavy lifting without additional machinery. So that's kind of their backstory, but it means that they have got these enormous muscles which you then have to pick out every detail of. So when you're highlighting something like this, if you're trying to paint muscles or anything similar and you're just doing the first layering highlight, you can be as selective or not as you like. I'm actually painting quite a lot of this at the moment because I'm mindful that this is going to be the first of possibly several layer highlights. So the idea is to do maybe 75% of the ray surfaces, and then as long as you leave those recesses, it'll look okay. Now, as you'll see whilst I'm painting this is quite a significant highlight. It is making a really noticeable difference to the model. So you could just leave it here, or I mean, you could have just left it as the Bugman's Glow in the wash, but you could just leave it with this one highlight layer. I'm going to take it further simply because I'm trying to learn this layering technique, and so I want to see what it looks like after 2 layers of this colour and a lighter colour to layer in afterwards, mainly to help me learn the technique. For the context of this video though, this is just going to be the first layer highlights. There will be later videos with the second layer and the third layer and so on, but for the context of this video it's just the first layer. Right, so that's coming to the end of this first Goliath with this sort of shotgun looking thing. Just finishing off doing the fingers and particularly highlighting the knuckles, which seems to be important. They do seem to be lighter than the surrounding fingers usually. But because this hasn't actually made very much footage, I'm also going to show you doing the same step on the Goliath Gang boss with the hammer over his shoulder. Same sort of technique obviously. But just going over it again to show you. So this isn't the second coat on the same guy, this is the same first layer highlight but on the next miniature. You can see most of them have been done in the background there. So this is like the 9th model has been done, and now the 10th model in the squad needs to be done. Or the gang, I suppose I should say. So just starting off, getting the paint the right consistency and twisting the brush as I drag it through the paint to give it a fine tip. And then with that tip, I'm trying to find the fine details like the nose, the eyebrows, the cheeks, the lines around the mouth, that sort of thing. I also do the top of the head where it meets the metal bit, or on some of the others where it meets the hair. And you find that gives it a lot of contrast, because obviously that area is dark, but the area you've just painted right next to it is light, so you get this sort of light versus dark contrast. So I also do this on my Tyranids. So if there's some black carapace on the top of the head, I'll take the flesh colour and I'll highlight it to the absolute maximum right at the top of the head, right next to the carapace, and you get this like nice contrast effect, and it seems to work for me, so I'm sticking with it. Now again, you don't have to do them all 100% the same. You can exercise a bit of artistic license, particularly if, like with this one, you have a bit of trouble getting in all of the details, you know, painting around his chin, his mouth, particularly with the little cigar sticking out, is quite difficult, so I'm just painting where I can. Hopefully they'll all end up looking like they've got just kind of tanned flesh, or dirty flesh, depending on how you look at it, because obviously they're meant to be in the underhive, underneath Hive City, so they're not going to be the cleanest. That's just kind of the look we're trying to convey here. And of course all of the stuff he's wearing is going to be made to look dirty and worn and so on as well. But obviously at this stage you're just picking out the highlights on the skin. Having done the face, quickly moving on to the surrounding area, the neck, the traps, the pecs, although with this guard in place you actually can't see them very well, but you would if you were looking at them from above, which of course as you put these on the tabletop and look down you tend to see, so I do go to the trouble of doing these areas just in case. But again, same work order, just working around all the details. I am occasionally getting bits of paint on the armour where it's already been dry brushed with lead belcher. That'll have to get fixed later, unfortunately, so unless I catch it really quickly there's not very much I can do about that. I just have to go around and correct it afterwards. Now again, like the model before, apart from slightly having to work around this hammer, I'm just trying to paint in the kind of directions that the muscle fibres would naturally run in. As you can see, this paint isn't particularly watered down, it is going on fairly thick, so it is making for quite an exaggerated highlight at this point. That doesn't matter, I mean we can highlight it slightly less going forwards with the following layers. And then you won't notice it so much because all of the surrounding areas will have been highlighted to catch up. But I normally have the paint slightly more watered down than that, so it's slightly more transparent. It's, you know, it's one of these fine judgment things which I'm still having to get used to, which is why I say that I'm still trying to learn this layering thing. Because I've only, for example, recently learned that I'd heard of glazing and I've heard of layering, and I thought they were radically different techniques. It turns out that they're actually very similar. The difference is glazes are usually thinner and you use more of them, whereas layering you'd normally do in, like, you know, 2, 3, 4 layers, whereas glazing you might arrive at the same effect in 40 or 50 extremely thin coats, which, as you can imagine, for your average tabletop mini is a bit much. If you're trying to enter a contest and you're trying to stand out, maybe then glazing is more of an option, particularly if you want to have really subtle transitions, really subtle colours. But I'm just layering for the time being. If I get onto glazing, I'll make a video about it. So when it comes to painting the arm, obviously I'm going to ignore any areas that are underneath this huge shoulder pad that he's got on. Anything that's poking out, anything that you can see clearly, including some of the muscles on the underarm you'd actually see as he holds the gun out. So obviously I'm just trying to highlight those, but anything that's directly under the shoulder or would naturally fall into shadow doesn't necessarily need highlighting because you wouldn't naturally see it. Now, in all honesty, I wasn't sure which parts of the hands and fingers to highlight. Helpfully, the way the model is, there are certain lumps and bumps and things like the knuckles stand up, there's lines on the back of the hands, there's bits like where the thumb and the palm bunch up holding the gun that naturally stand up, so I'm obviously putting paint on those, and on also the bulge on the lower part of the hand, I'm just highlighting that, just so there's some kind of highlighting on the hand. Same again on this other hand. Obviously by the bandage there's not much to highlight, but over the fingers I just run across, you know, the knuckles very quickly and then just highlight what seems to be the upper edge of each finger, and that seems to do the trick. Right, so here we have a picture of the Goliath before this level of highlighting with just the Bugman's Glow and the Army Painter Flesh wash. And secondly, we have the same model after it's had this layer highlighting done to it. I'm hoping you can see the difference there. So this step is well worth doing, but it is the first of several layering steps. And now from another angle, so you can see how I've done the musculature on the back and the arms to a degree. You can also see on some of the pipes and fittings where I've actually accidentally got a bit of paint on them, so that will need correcting later, but I'll do that at a much later stage. And finally, how the gang leader and the rest of the gang look from the front. So as you can see, I've kind of gone over every part of the model and highlighted it wherever it really seems appropriate, but not to obscure the recesses.
Right, thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this, hit like, hit subscribe, hit the little bell-shaped icon so you can see when the next video will be out. I hope that will be soon. Thank you for watching.